Rush Limbaugh's troubles continue. His ratings are an absolute disaster, so I'm going to give you some specifics on that here. This is from Media Matters. They say, quote, "The bad news just keeps coming for conservative talker Rush Limbaugh. Which bulletin was worse, though? The news in April that he was being dropped by WIBC in Indianapolis, a booming talk powerhouse that played home to Limbaugh's radio show for more than 2 decades, or the news this week that the talker's new address on the Indianapolis dial is going to be WNDE, a ratings doormat AM sports station that has so few listeners, it trails the commercial-free classical music outlet in town." So they go on to explain that in New York, Los Angeles, and Boston, which are very important radio markets, he's now, off his flagship station in New York, but even in the other places, he's off the first-tier stations, and he's now on second-tier stations, and even in some cases, third-tier stations. So in the biggest markets, Rush Limbaugh is now on second-tier and third-tier stations. Now, remember, we also covered last year, this didn't get much coverage, it should have, that Limbaugh, in certain markets, he's now beaten by college radio stations. For those of you who know anything about radio, you know how disastrous that is, because college signals suck. They don't go out very far. But more people were listening to college radio than listening to Rush Limbaugh, who's been bragging about the powerhouse that he is for decades. Now, I want to give you some more specifics here. These are some numbers from last year. We've gone, over them before, but if anything, these numbers are getting worse. So, for example, in New York, what's he ranked? Remember, this is the guy who's number one in conservative talk, and he boasts, I get like 20 million listeners every 33 seconds. Okay, so in New York, again, that's where his flagship station was. He was kicked off his flagship station. He's on WORAM. He's ranked 21st. 21st. What happened? I thought you were number one. Los Angeles. 37th. I didn't even know there were 37 stations that came in with a clear signal. 37th. Now, you might say, well, come on, Kyle, those are, mostly liberal areas, and that's a fair point, except back in Limbaugh's heyday in the 90s, in these markets, his ratings were tremendous. So, if you're comparing apples to apples, his prime versus now, him versus him, it's still a disaster, even though you say they're liberal cities. And by the way, there are plenty of conservatives packed in these gigantic cities where there are mostly liberal people. Okay, how about Chicago? 23rd. San Francisco, 29th. How about Dallas and the Fort Worth, Texas area? 18th. How about Philadelphia? 18th. How about Miami, Florida? 24th. How about Seattle? 22nd. Now, there's a lot more numbers here. I only printed out some of them. But if you go through it, I don't think he's number one in any market anymore. This is the guy who markets himself as the number one guy, the biggest conservative talker, millions of listeners, this and that. Dude, it's all a house of cards. Now, his syndication contract is up next year. Oh, wait and see what happens when it's up. Oh, it's going to be adorable. It's going to be hilarious. Because understand, for a while now, he's basically been coasting off of welfare checks from right-wing think tanks. A lot of people don't know this. The right-wing media machine is basically a giant facade because you have groups like Americans for Prosperity and not Cato, but some of the other more Tea Party-leaning ones. They, Heritage Foundation, for example, they give money to Glenn Beck and the Blaze Network. They give money to Sean Hannity. They give money to Rush Limbaugh. They give money to Mark Levin. And remember, Limbaugh's advertisers have been running for the hills going all the way back to the Sandra Fluke incident. When he, oh, this woman's a whore because she takes birth control. Listen to my argument from 1952. And a lot of advertisers were like, dude, you've gone too far. You're a bigger liability now. You're not helping us anymore. So a lot of advertisers pulled their ads. Did you know? So I used to listen to some of his show to get some material for my show, going back 2-3 years or so, back when he was still on his flagship station here in New York. They literally played dead air during the break sometimes. And sometimes they played public service announcements. Oh my God. When you're down to public service announcements and dead air, you basically have no advertisers left. Nobody wants to pay you to be on air. And anybody who knows anything about radio or TV or any of that stuff knows you need advertisers to stay on the air. And again, that brings me back to my sugar daddy point, how he's getting his welfare checks from the right-wing think tanks. The second they realize that this guy's not making them any money and they're just blowing money on him, millions of dollars on him, they're going to go, why would we keep funding him? He's not helping us. He's not getting... The idea is, they pay these guys and these guys... basically push for their listeners to join up with these right-wing think tanks and get their newsletters and all that garbage. Well, there's no return on investment. There was a good article in Politico recently which highlighted that. They explained how they spent X amount of money on Beck and Limbaugh and they got X amount of money in return. They're running millions of dollars in the red. So it's a lost investment. Guys, it's going to implode soon. The fucking House of Cards is going to implode, and guess who's going to be there to take the place in political talk? There was this fucking monster that was coming up behind them at 100 miles an hour, the internet. And they laughed and they poo-pooed it and they ignored it and they acted like, these newfangled machines, nobody can understand them anyway. AM radio is where people want to go. Reminds me probably back in the day. Morse code is never going to go out of style. This crazy contraption where you talk into one end and somebody's listening on the other end, that's too difficult to use. They'll like the Morse code. You just press the do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do. Our industry will never go away. The horse and buggy people, when the first cars came along, I don't know what we got a horse and a buggy. It works. Good old-fashioned horses. Who would want a car? It's too difficult to work. What happens when it breaks? Stick with the horse and buggy. How'd it work out for all those people? It didn't work out for them. They're gone. How are the floppy disk people feeling today? What's this CD-ROM nonsense that came about? Oh, floppy disks will never go away. Or even the CD people, how do they feel with the internet coming along also? Dude, it's over. You're done. You're done. Step aside, son.